Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on for the first time, Lisa Franz. She is originally from Germany. She has her master's in exercise science and health, and she is the host of the Nutrition and Life podcast. So, Lisa, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
It's my absolute pleasure, Jeff. I'm super excited to talk to you. And we were speaking just a few days ago on my podcast when I had you on as a guest. So I'm excited to connect with your audience as well.
Yeah, no, I had a great time on your podcast. Like I told you, you're a great host, and it's all I don't think we talked about this, but it's always weird like being on the opposite end of it, right? Like I'm usually used to hosting. I don't know how many podcasts you're on, but I would say like for me, it's I'm maybe on like 5 to 10 a year compared to doing hundreds of episodes a year. So it's like it's a lot different. But do you find that it's a little bit different, kind of being the guest versus being the
It is. It's nice. I do like the role of interviewer, but I also like being interviewed. So it's not. I'm not as familiar with that role either, though.
it's fun to just kind of be able to talk and be the one talking about information too, but it's also fun to learn from others as well too, and I think that's the cool part about being a host. So cool. Well, yeah, really looking forward to chatting with you today. We have some really cool topics that I want to dive into, but first, before I do that, I always like to just kind of go over for a new guest, kind of the just kind of a background on how you got to where we're at today, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So yeah, as you said, my name is Lisa Franz. I'm the owner and operator of Nutrition Coaching and Life. And the reason why I got into nutrition coaching is mostly after years of struggling through yo-yo dieting, trying various different diets. I finally found flexible dieting or learned about calorie balance because, believe it or not, in our exercise science and health promotion or nutrition studies, even in my master's, there was never a mention of, oh, you can manipulate your body composition with this and that. It's just like I had my first teacher, she was a big fan of the low fat approach. The next teacher, she was a big fan of the low carb approach. And so by the end of my time at university, I was essentially like eating protein and a bit of vegetables. And lo and behold, I felt really deprived. I was like looking forward to my cheat days and cheat meals every, and I was feeling guilty when I would eat out. And so when I finally learned about flexible dieting, which was after a while of doing paleo, when I started CrossFit and so on, I was like, it was like the blinders came away from my eyes, and I was just like, whoa, you can live a life in a body you love while eating out and traveling. And as we'll get into, that's super important to me, just like having a social life as well. And up until that point, I always thought I needed to pick one or the other, either looking the way I wanted to look and feeling really deprived and saying no to lots of things, feeling guilty, or being able to travel and enjoy my life. And so when that opened up, I was like, I want to teach as many people as I possibly can that you can have it all, essentially, not all at the same time, as you and I both know, but in the end you can learn how to work in slice of pizza, but a brownie or whatever from time to time and just feel great doing it, performing great, and mental performance as well. And so yeah, since then I have shifted from, because actually after I got out of university, since I didn't really feel very connected with exercise science and nutrition at the time, I was like, oh, what do I do with this? I don't want to be a personal trainer. I felt like I needed more life experience. I joined the New Zealand police for several years, and I was a frontline police officer, but never really enjoyed the work per se. I learned a lot about myself and about humanity, but I was always thinking about my training. I was thinking about, how I can help other people with their nutrition already. And so I decided I wanted to make that my full-time job, and I wanted to do it remotely, so working from anywhere so that I could travel as well. And I was working for Tailored Coaching Method. You might be familiar with that company,
Yeah.
for about 2.5 years for Cody McBroom. He's an amazing person, learned so much from him. And for the last 3 years now, I have had my own company and trying to pass it on and continue with my mission.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I didn't realize that you kind of your background before getting into to fitness. How long were you an officer for?
Just 5 years, but long enough for it to ruin my hormones and my mental health a little bit also, just with the shift work and so on. It's definitely taught me to prioritize sleep, to focus on all those big and little things that you and I spoke about on my podcast as well, like sleep routine, like having sleep hygiene leading up to go into bed, and being very, very diligent about all these things in order to restore my circadian rhythm. Because honestly, when I got out of the police, I would wake up in a quote unquote normal night 6 to 8 times, just super, super light sleeper. On average, I would have slept 4 to 5 hours. And on top of that, training CrossFit 6 times per week minimum for 2 hours a day. So yeah, don't need to talk about my status of the hormones at that time.
Would you say it was more like the foundation of it? Do you think it was kind of the circadian rhythm, more than anything that,
Oh, absolutely.
because again, I would imagine it was that, but then obviously, like, being an officer, that's, a stressful job in itself, right? I mean, you're always kind of putting yourself at risk. And then on top of it, you have the training. But I'm assuming for you, you feel like that was at the base, was the circadian rhythm
Yes,
aspect.
the base was definitely lack of sleep, but then on top of that, as you mentioned, just being always high alert state, I was just running off cortisol the entire time, essentially.
Do you think it was more like the shift work that was causing it, or just the lack of sleep, or a combination of both of them?
I think the shift work was at the root of it, because we had a horrible, absolutely horrible shift roster. I don't know what it is like with for police officers in the US. I assume it varies probably from state as well. But in New Zealand, we had like 2 early shifts, so normal day shifts, 2 late shifts until 3 a.m., and then 2 night shifts, so from 10 p.m. until 7 a.m. And then you get 3 days off, one of which you essentially spend or are supposed to spend sleeping. And then you do it all again. So you never, ever settle into anything. I would have preferred to just do nights for like 2, 3 months in a row, just to get accustomed to something. But with this constant change, it was just absolutely horrible. And what I noticed after a while was also that my mental health was really, really suffering from it. I was like, I'm normally a very happy person. I get joy out of the little things. And it came to a point where my dog came up to me and she wanted to be pet, and I was just so annoyed just that she was there. It's like
Yeah.
almost like shut up, or the birds were tripping. I was like, shut up, birds, like everything. If you're just running on that little sleep and just being super thin-skinned, everything's starting to annoy you. And that was the moment where I realized I needed to change something, and that was the best thing I could have done to get out of it at the time when I did.
Yeah. I mean, like, and that's unfortunate too, because, with that job, it's like ideally you'd be in a, kind of good health condition, right? Like kind of firing on all cylinders from that perspective, just because again, it is, very, what you have to do is very serious, and, there's a lot at stake. And so, you know, not,
Absolutely.
not being in that state, can really impact your decision making and everything like that along the way.
Totally. And I mean, the officers that I worked with, like, I can't think of more than 1 or 2 that were in a reasonable shape, to be entirely
That's
honest. And for me also, because I was training so hard at the time, it actually led to injuries in CrossFit, also just because I was
yeah.
training too much. So again, combination of several things, and my own personal competitive nature where I couldn't hold myself back. But because of that, I have actually since 2018, essentially shifted out of CrossFit, and I'm doing now more bodybuilding style training. I was doing more like more strength focused for a few years, but the last 2 years I've really shifted into bodybuilding style training. I have never been on stage, nor do I currently have any aspirations to step on stage. I just love training that way now. I will say though, for any of you guys who love the high intensity training, it took me a long time to find appreciation for that style of training. At first I was like, this is so boring. I miss the group environment. I miss finishing a workout totally drenched in sweat and just thinking like, oh my gosh, I left it all on the floor. And then learning to like appreciate, hey, that's not necessarily the best for long-term health, and not even for aesthetics. It took me a really long time to get into that, but now I feel so much better. I have so much more energy for my days. And I'm also a lot happier, or even happier with my physique than I was then as well.
Yeah. So would you say then that that's like kind of the main reasons why maybe you feel like that's not necessarily, the greatest kind of form of training, for the reasons you mentioned? Is there anything else you would kind of like add to that, or anything like that?
Yeah, I would absolutely say for myself and for most people that I have worked with as a coach since then, this if you lead a high stress life, whether that be for work reasons, for emotional reasons with your partner, for just in general a high stress environment with traffic and kids and whatever, lack of sleep. I do not believe that the style of training in terms of CrossFit every single day of the week, if you want to do it once a week,
Yeah.
if you're, in some sort of other group fitness classes, I don't think that that is the best in terms of overall health or long-term health, nor for physique, for aesthetics. And yeah, of course, we always need to consider someone's adherence. So if someone says, I'm going to do a class or I'm not going to work out at all, okay, cool. Just make sure you learn to check your ego at the door. And I always read that, you know how they have the sayings up on the wall. I read like, check your ego at the door. And yet there was Lisa who wanted to win every single WOD and
Yeah.
like, just wanted to die every single day out there on the floor. And so, yeah, I personally was not able or had not learned how to check my ego at the door.
Yeah, like you said, again, with it, with a lot of like, stress and stuff like that, maybe not the best type of training. And I'm assuming we're talking kind of like you kind of mentioned health long term, again, staying injury free, that's obviously important, but I'm assuming, we're kind of mainly speaking kind of body composition here.
Right.
I guess then like for you, where do you kind of see this type of training fit in? Because I agree with you. It's like, if you enjoy, training like that, it's like, go ahead and do that. I think if, again, body comp is your main goal, it's like, I always kind of tell people, I think at a minimum, then like 50% at a minimum needs to be geared towards like kind of hypertrophy style, kind of bodybuilding style. If body comp is your number one goal, but this type of training we can't fit in. We just have to be kind of like real, we just have to be, we just have to understand the potential trade-offs of, this type of training. So I guess, where do you kind of see this type of training kind of fit in if somebody is mainly focused on like body comp?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what I do think is great about that type of training is that it gets a lot of people moving and doing compound lifts as well. So for example, I was somebody who I never saw myself strength training in general. I just thought that, that old preconceived notion, you're gonna get bulky, you're gonna look this and that way, and it's only for people that want to do bodybuilding. And so CrossFit for me was like, oh, something that's varied, something that's different. I came from a track and field background, so I liked the running aspect and learning how to do the gymnastics. I was always more performance focused. But then, yeah, again, if you have, because you see the people that go to the games, they look very fit, but then you look at your quote unquote average CrossFitter, and most of them have a good amount or have a extra body fat, right? So if we're looking at what are we really focusing on, if we want to get most out of our body composition, I personally have found the going more into bodybuilding style training has changed a world for me in the sense of learning how to connect to certain muscles. Like for me, it was always more about the exercise execution. And I didn't realize up until 2.5 years ago that I was not able to switch on my glutes. I didn't know how to activate my lats. So I was executing pull-ups purely with my biceps, was what felt like. I had a sciatic nerve injury because of the low glute activation. So basically from when I stopped with the CrossFit training, I still did barbell work and everything else. And then the pandemic hit. And so wasn't able to shift to a gym quite yet. I continued with barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells. And I think you can already get quite a great physique with that equipment. But in the last 2 years, I switched to going to the gym. So what that has allowed me to do is through things like abductions, through leg presses, and so on, it has allowed me to recover from my sciatic nerve aggravation and at the same time learn how to activate specific muscle groups a lot better. Yes, you can also do that with dumbbells and kettlebells, but I do think there is some benefit to certain machines, especially if someone is new, if someone is injured, if someone has imbalances in certain muscle areas, as it was the case for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and it sounds like kind of the injury aspect of it, right? I mean, because that's to me seems like kind of injury management there, and yeah, so that makes sense. And I always kind of tell people too with like kind of CrossFit style training, circuit style. It's kind of more of like a kind of performance based kind of training, right? Where it's like that's fine. Like if you enjoy doing that and you want to get better, and I do, again, there are a ton of benefits of it. It's just we have to understand, what it's there for, and kind of what's the adaptation that we're getting out of it. And also with the CrossFit athletes too, you kind of mentioned like they're in great shape, and I think people kind of see that as like, hey, they do CrossFit, that's how they look, that's what I have to do to get there. But I think it's more of the kind of exception to the rule, and like that's kind of like those people are kind of like picked to be, I guess genetically, they fit best for that. And like, those are the types of, kind of body comps that people are going to, get when they, they're just kind of predispositioned to that type of training and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned the performance focus. And yeah, while at that time I had a bit of a performance focus, like I fell in love with it and I thought I could get really good at it. But obviously never made it to that point. But what I learned after a while then also, this is from the Nutritional Coaching Institute, I learned that through them, that we essentially can think of performance, health, and aesthetic as kind of a triangle. So if we're aiming for peak performance, you're not going to be at your healthiest, and nor are you going to most likely be at your aesthetic peak. Because even now, if we look at the CrossFit athletes, they've all kind of learned, okay, we probably don't want to be in a single digit body fat level as a female. That's not conducive for hormonal health, and therefore we're not going to perform as well as we should be. At the same time, someone who's training for peak aesthetics at the end of, or when you're competing in a bodybuilding show, your hormones are not at their optimal and you're probably not as strong as you could be. So learning about this and just thinking about what do I really want to focus on has really helped me personally set goals, but also with my clients. Because if they come to me and they say, I want to run this marathon, but I also want to look my very best, I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. That's probably not going to work. We can get you a pretty good time in the marathon and at the same time reasonably healthy. But if you really, really have a performance aspirations, we might need to tweak something here or there. Or, so having that conversation with yourself, but also with your clients, I think is really important just to set the right level of expectations.
Yep, I think it's all about the expectations because, like you said, there with the performance, part of that, like that kind of triangle you're talking about, part of that performance is, like you said, fueling yourself and making sure that you're, well fueled for that. And so if you're, like you said, you were at this point, and I think a lot of people join, do this type of training to like maybe get like to improve their body composition. They're under fueling. They're not, really hitting the performance aspect of it. And you just kind of get yourself into trouble there. And I think that's where, again, that kind of like, we just, like you said, the expectations and just, laying that out, I think is super important. So,
well, and the other thing I'm sorry to cut you
yeah,
off,
good.
but the other thing that I had to learn as well is how helpful it is if we're putting a periodization behind that. So let's just say, going back to that athlete who's saying like, I want to run that marathon here and there. Okay, cool. Maybe for 3-4 months of the year, we're going to focus on your run training, pulling a little bit on the strength training, and just adding, the minimum in there, making sure we're actually fueling you well. Then after that, maybe having a strength cycle, and then after that, maybe having an aesthetic focus or so. So if we're going about that in this way, you can still have it all, not at the same time, but you can. And that's something I had to learn too, because for me, it was always just like I was saying, every single workout, leaving it all on the floor. And so, yeah, once I had then transitioned into more of the bodybuilding kind of training, I was mostly eating at maintenance because I saw improvements nonetheless. But then after my sciatic nerve thingy, I realized that actually my body was craving more. And also I had lost quite a bit of glute volume because of nurturing that injury. And so 2 years ago, I decided to do my first gaining phase. And for anyone listening who has never done a gaining phase, for me, it was quite terrifying, to be honest, because you see the various things online. You either see competitors that blow up or like people that get really chubby. And for me, it wasn't so much the scale as in like the fear of not fitting into my clothes or what are people going to say, especially if you're a coach and you feel like you have to kind of live what you preach as well. So you don't want to get super fat. But so I had to really take baby steps with that. I honestly like increased my calories by like 100 a little bit and then waited and, oh, okay, I still look okay. I'm actually sleeping a little bit better. Maybe I can push that more and more and more and more. So I just worked with kind of the minimal dosage so that my mind could keep up as well. And after 8 months of gaining, like I felt quite comfortable still with it. It was I would call it a quote unquote lean gaining phase. I maintained for a summer and then I did another 6 months of gaining, and now I have done a small mini cut in the spring and have been maintaining for a few months now. So it's been a really great experience for me to walk through certain periodizations like this too, because up until that point, of course, I was helping clients through all of that, but I had never experienced. And I think you agree on this, that if as a coach we have a personal experience with something too, it just makes us more able to relate to our clients as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely being able to like go through it. I mean, it just you get to kind of see the ins and outs, some of the challenges that you don't really think about. Yeah, no, that's super cool. I'm glad to hear that you were able to kind of do that. Like you said, lean gain phase, whatever you want to call it, right? You hear it kind of called many different things. For you, what was, I guess, kind of what's your kind of scale weight done like throughout that time? Was that kind of like a big kind of hurdle for you there, or what did that
No,
kind of
like
look like?
during, so the first gaining phase with the 8 months, I was aiming for about a pound per month, so half a kilo. And I very nicely stuck with that and then maintained, like I was saying, over that summer. And then the next gaining phase, even slower. So maybe about like 0.7 of a pound per month for another 6 months. And then I was actually really surprised how quickly that came off in like 10 weeks of a small cut this spring. And been basically like now in comparison to when I started with this, about 2 pounds up. So I mean, not a ton of muscle mass added, but I have also reshaped my body a little bit because I definitely had more of a CrossFit statue in the sense of a stronger core and just overall bulkier in the upper body. And now I have been more focusing on like delt development and glutes. So kind of a training like a bikini competitor and aiming for that physique without actually being a competitor.
Yeah, and in your specific example there, like you kind of said, it's like maybe 2 pound difference, but things just get very noisy within that, right? Because like you said, it's like your body looks different, and so I think if we just overly focus on like the scale, you kind of are missing out on the big picture. So like you said, your body just kind of looks different. It's shaped a lot different now, which obviously I'm sure is what your goal was there, and I mean even 2 pounds of muscle, that's a pretty good amount, and that can make a big difference, right? Especially in certain areas. So
Yeah, definitely. And for me, more than anything, like the things that I really feel like I have learned so much is the activation of specific muscle groups and just what, like I used to squat and just bounce out of the bottom, and it's just about getting it up sort of thing. And now I can squat, and if someone tells me, oh, engage this part, I'm like, okay, I can do that, I can do that. So I feel like I have mostly the aspect where I have grown most in is getting to know my body better and feeling better overall, also just in my training. But yeah, and I mean, I won't say that I did not have any struggles throughout the lean gaining phase mentally. Of course, at some point your clothes get a little tighter, you feel a little bit more bloated, and the first instinct is that you want to cut, you want to pull out of the gaining phase. And the good thing was that I had committed to it, to my, like, in terms of, I announced it to my clients or to my colleagues as well, and that works as a form of accountability for me when I can just be like, oh shoot, I said I was going to do it at least 6 months, darn it, I can't just stop after 1 month. And so I always encourage people, because I think we go through that, we see that very regularly, particularly for females who, if you're ovulating, if you're on your period and you're feeling bloated anyway, but then at this stage you're attributing it to the gaining phase. What I will say though, that I have a couple of times have seen people wanting to do a gaining phase, and what happened was that they just got a little bit too loose with
yep.
everything. So you probably have seen that too. When okay, those extra 200-300 calories or whatever it might be, we're gonna use that now for whatever, and then suddenly they're surprised that they're feeling fluffier because they've been spending it on bread and pizza and whatever all the time. And so I was very strategic around about bunching the carbs more around my workouts, about keeping food quality clean, about also when I'm eating out, because I do eat out frequently, still maintaining accuracy. So I do think that a lot of people, when they go into a gaining phase, one of the biggest mistakes that they make is just becoming a little bit too loose, eating out too much, and just being like, oh, today I didn't track, or I just like really eyeballed that very loosely, and and then before you know it, fat does pile on, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with that. I think, with the, the building phases, it's like one of those things where you do want that momentum, right? I think that there's momentum to it, and you do want to try to, stay there as long as you can. But it can be very tempting to want to get out of that and, like you said, go back to a fat loss phase. But at the root of it is ultimately like people just get a little too lax during that period of time, and then they just gain more body fat, and then they're thinking that it's the building phase that's causing them to, and like they need to be in a fat loss phase, and then it just ends up kind of like cementing that kind of thought process of like, hey, I only look good when I fat loss diet, right? And it's that just kind of that vicious cycle. So I couldn't agree more that, like, really checking your kind of adherence is ultimately, the big thing there. And we don't really need that big of a surplus anyways, right? And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I generally find that, somebody like you, you're lean, like you're going to need to be in that small surplus to build muscle. But I find that a lot of, people that are more just like kind of Gen Pop, maybe they've, they have extra body fat to where like they could be closer to maintenance, right? The big thing is just kind of getting out of that deficit and getting out of that fat loss mindset, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think exactly like you're saying, if your body comes, if you have a little bit more body fat, or if especially for someone who's newer to strength training, you can absolutely achieve quite a bit in terms of recomposition, just at a maintenance level, or just learning how to eat a high protein diet and all that thing. But I do also see a lot of, well, I mostly work with women, so I see it more in women, a lot of women that are like, oh no, I'm just gonna quote unquote continue to recomp at maintenance the whole time. And they're never really getting anywhere. And I was kind of at that place in the past as well, where you're like, well, as you said, you do, like, even if it's just 5% in a surplus, that, what are you afraid of? Let's just do that. Let's just commit 6, 8 months to being in that spot, and then within a couple of months you can get a little bit of extra fat off. But you don't want to just keep spinning in circles, or even being in a small deficit the entire time and then having your metabolism adapt. But generally speaking, when someone comes to me and they're like, oh, Lisa, what should we start off with? I do think I want to add a little bit more muscle here and there, but generally I want to shape up or whatever. There are a few criteria that I think through. So first of all, how much muscle does that person currently have? Because if they hardly have any muscle and we're starting off with a deficit, they're just going to look skinny fat essentially, and they're not going to be happy with their results. So it might be a matter of, let's build muscle here now at maintenance, because you don't have any, you're new to strength training and so on. That's cool. Come on, let's do it. And then we can still do a cut in half a year or a year, ideally. On the flip side, if someone comes perhaps from like a CrossFit type background, they do have a good amount of muscle, they are a little bit fluffier, maybe they do want to reshape, I would say, hey, let's start with a cut, and just tweak your training as well. And then we can go into another a building phase or whatever more specific next year. So that would be a different consideration if you already have more muscle. And also what we should not forget is, how comfortable is that person currently in their body? Because if they're like really, really uncomfortable and they just want to get rid of fat, and they have not been dieting on end, I would say starting with a cut is going to give you a buy-in, is going to get them more motivated than if you tell them like, hey, you know what, over the next few, we're probably going to add another 5, 6 pounds to this. Oh, they're going to lose interest and probably head to the next isogenics or whatever detox in no time.
Yeah. So,
So
really,
yeah, sorry, carry on.
no, yeah. Sorry, there's a little bit of I think the internet just got a little unstable there, but I think we're caught up now, so I think we're good. But yeah, no, that all makes sense, right? Again, really just kind of taking into consideration where the person is at, right, is super important in terms of like, if you're going to kind of push a deficit, a surplus, or maintenance. So again, I mean, it sounds like, the kind of like current levels of muscle is, going to obviously play a big role in terms of where you think somebody's going to go. But again, body fat levels too, right? I mean, that's another one
Yes.
that you're going to consider where they're currently at. So again, somebody's, pretty lean, has a good amount of muscle. They want to build a little bit more muscle, what's kind of the kind of route of action for them.
Yeah, so yeah, if they're pretty lean and they already have a good amount of muscle, and they want to add more muscle, or so I would definitely say like gaining phase, 6 months. I would say anything less than 3 months, you're really like wasting your time. That's not really a gaining phase at all. And even 3 months, how much can you achieve in 3 months? Realistically speaking, 6 months lean gaining, 3 months of a bit of a cut, and then 3 months maintaining. I think that could be a really great periodization for someone to implement many years in a row in order to achieve what they actually want to achieve, or even get to a place of maintaining for a couple of years. I think practicing maintenance is such an underrated skill, and I get it, like I truly, because we don't have as many measurable metrics. You're not aiming for the scale to go up or down. You're not aiming, the changes in your body are not going to be super visible from month to month even. But the practicing maintenance is where most people, as you and I know, struggle with or fail with. Like, we're pretty good as a race in losing fat, and even in putting on muscle to an extent nowadays, thankfully. But at maintaining a certain level, definitely not so much. And this is why I'm so big also on practicing how to eat out and so on, because essentially for most people, that is part of our lifestyle. Most people are going to want to have a meal out once or even twice a week. Or if someone else cooks for you, if your spouse cooks for you, don't want to say like, oh, sorry, I can't eat that. I'm currently trying to lose, but whatever. So sometimes it is such a good skill to learn, to eyeball a little bit better or to estimate better. And how I try to teach people that a bit more is even just like, first of all, if we start off with, we do need to weigh out as much as we can just to get that initial skill. Like, you can't assume that within you it is ingrained as a human that you just know what 100 grams or 6 ounces of something looks like. You do not know that. You need to build that skill. And so therefore weighing out as much as we can initially is really, really important. And then you can start by, before you place that on the scale, already taken a guess in your mind. Does that look like 4 or 6 ounces? Oh, okay, it's actually 7. Well, okay, next time you make a mental picture of that and you go on. And also actually taking pictures of your foods when you're eating out. I find that very helpful, not just to send to your coach potentially for some double checking, but also for yourself, because you might see in that picture, oh, there were actually some pumpkin seeds on top, and there was some blue cheese. I didn't even realize there was the
Yep.
sprinkle of that, and then there was the balsamic glaze and whatever, and you just thought that that was rice and chicken. But if you only log the rice and chicken, you're missing 400 calories, and if you do that several times a week, that does that up. So I think definitely something to practice. And where people go wrong most there is they simply say, oh, I'm only eating out once a week, I'm just gonna not track it today. And then that becomes, oh, I'm just gonna go on that work trip next weekend, I'm not gonna track it at all. And then that turns into, next month we're going on vacation. And okay, by all means, if you go on vacation once every 10 years, you don't need to track that. But if you're traveling frequently like I do, if I would stop every single time, I would most certainly not have been able to maintain my physique. So it is much smarter to just say, okay, I'm going to plan a little bit ahead, especially initially. You want to do as much planning as you can, thinking about what restaurant am I going to go to. Maybe I can even already look at the menu beforehand so that I can plan my day a little bit around it. And maybe I can even already enter something. I know I'm going to have the ribeye, and that's going to be cooked in at least a tablespoon of oil, and I'm going to get the sweet potato with it and some broccoli or whatever. So it's easy to log initially. We don't want to start with the mixed fried rice right off the bat, because that's more difficult to log. So it is a skill and you're going to get better at it. But if you stop and every time you eat out, you don't log, you're never going to improve. So that's really where I try to work on, what I try to work on with my clients.
Yeah, no, ton of great points in there. And kind of like you said, it's one of those things where if you only go on a vacation once every 10 years, it's no big deal. If you go out to eat once every month, it's like it's no big deal. But then like you start to do it more often, it's like, you know, you kind of have two options. You have one of, okay, you don't track these things and now you're probably going to, are you actually going to learn how to manage it? Or two, yeah, you make some sacrifice and you actually, get better at it because it's part of your lifestyle. And again, if you don't work on that, that's probably going to be something that's going to continue to kind of rear its ugly head every single time, you're trying to make some sort of change. So again, I really like that point there where it's like, hey, the more often you do this, the better we need to get at this. What are sorry, I had a question on that that I wanted to follow up. I guess then is this something like, again, I guess how with your clients that do like to go out to eat relatively often, do you with them, I'm sorry, I'm still trying to remember the question that I was going to ask you. Do you ever do that when you're interviewing people? You have a
Oh
question
yeah,
and you're like, I
absolutely.
have a
Also,
perfect
no,
one.
there's too many questions popping up and then they're kind of lost. But in general, I do have various degrees of people that eat out. Like some people, they need to eat out for work purposes as well on a regular basis, or particularly I work with quite a few people in the Middle East as well, like Dubai and so on. For them, it's actually quite common to have like a housekeeper prepare their food or to follow a meal plan, so they get like delivered meal delivery services and so on. So that, I mean, that is helpful. But if you if you always eat out for work purposes or so, especially initially, I think it is very helpful to teach them to just center their meals around protein and not pick the most difficult ones. Because if you start off with the lasagna, or if you start off with, it's harder to estimate that. The lasagna might be 500 calories and might be 1,200. I don't know exactly what they use. So if we choose something like a grilled chicken or grilled fish or whatever else it might be, and we add some vegetables with that, and depending on how many calories they have to spare, they can add a bit of like a slice of bread or some carb source. I think it's a lot easier to track. And also it is a lot easier in a restaurant to say like, hey, hold the sauces, or can you have the sauce separately? Just a few little tricks here and there. But if you have a stir fry, they're gonna use an amount of oil that's very hard to estimate for. So yeah, I would always say, like, if you're starting off, center your meals around protein, get some vegetables with it, and then depending on your calorie allotment, decide if you want to have some carbs with it or not. I do almost always recommend, though, even if you have the allotment for carbs, to wait until you have had some vegetables or protein, just for that better satiation feeling, for that better blood sugar response, because we tend to sit there at the table and just munch on the bread basket things or the chips that they bring out, and that it makes you eat more in the long run, and it also leads to you being a little bit hungrier later on. At least that's what I have found and even observed with like a continuous blood glucose monitor, played around with that for a little bit. I don't know if you've ever experimented with that, Jeff.
I personally haven't, but I know that there's, definitely some benefit to, messing around with it and just kind of seeing your response to certain
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, for me, it was more out of curiosity,
Yeah.
nothing else. And I wouldn't want to wear it consistently or always, but it was like a few days, just kind of taking a look at how I respond differently to certain things, because I have found this is so individual. And even going back to the point of sleep, even if I have slept more poorly, I will respond differently to my protein or oats in the morning than if I have had a great night's sleep, or if I had fruit before I have my protein and my oats. I also have a different blood sugar response than if I have that fruit later. So even in terms of sequencing, I found it very interesting. But I mean, that's just nerding out a little bit. As I said, certainly not something that I do with my clients on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that stuff's super interesting and, it's always fun to experiment. And again, everyone's a little bit different. So kind of finding, I think really just comes down to, how much you want to maximize things, right? And how important that is to you. And, we love doing this. So it makes sense that, hey, you want to, kind of find every, little thing that you can and see if there's anything there from that perspective. So I did actually remember my question did pop up to me. That always happens, right? Where it's like you forget it and then you're in the middle of it. So would you rather have like a client? So if they're out tracking and this is just what I hear of like, oh, it's just really hard to like track. And I understand, right? I'm like, yeah, I totally understand that's hard to track. So would you rather them like just not track at all or try to guess, like just have like kind of a
I would much
guesstimate?
rather they just guess, honestly, really, because at least then that gives me a sense of how good or bad of a guesser they are. So I would then, in their check-in, go into their food diary, and if they tell me, oh, I went out for sushi, and then I see maybe like 3 sushi rolls logged and 250 calories. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Or pizza or whatever, and it says like 300 calories. I'm like, yeah, did you really just have like one slice? I don't think so. So then we can have a conversation about this, and I can be like, hey, I know that it's really difficult because there's like a gazillion different logs in my fitness pal or whatever tracker you're using. I know that there are some that say 200 calories and then some that say like 1000 whatever calories. So how to pick the right one, I get that that's very difficult, but that's what we can train also. We can work on, again, sending pictures, taking a picture of that so I can see that's actually not a thin crust pizza, and you know, it has the stuffed crust too. So that slice was probably more like XYZ, and you had 3 of those. Plus, also, did you have a beverage with it, or did you have some sauce with it? Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Well, there you go. This 300 calorie meal just turned into 900. So next time that person knows.
Right. It's less like, I think some people hear that and they think that like we're just trying to be like, see, I got you. Like, but it's like more,
No.
it's like bringing that awareness to it, right? Of like, you know, hey, if you're not seeing the results you want to see and you do this regularly, like this is how it's adding up. And it's just kind of the unfortunate truth. You know, I'm not trying to tell you not to do these things. It's just, you know, you can, you know, we just live in a world where it's just super easy to consume a lot of extra calories without really even realizing it. And again, I think that's a great tool. Yeah. So I like that, you know, just having clients, you know, guess versus not tracking at all. And like you said, if anything, you can at least teach them how, you know, how to, you know, apply that in the future better there. So that makes
And
a ton of
that's I mean, that's the most important thing to me, that they take something away from the coaching long
Yep.
term, and have some explanations for themselves as well long term when they're eating whatever else it is that they're eating, that they're just more mindful of everything, right? So that you take note of, oh, there's a ton of cheese on this. It's not possible that that only has 40 calories, or this is like bathing in butter. No way that I can only log 40. So yeah, long term, you're going to gain so much more awareness, and that's really the most important thing.
Yeah, I find that, you know, if you can kind of master the skill of going out to eat and stay, you know, doing that, like, man, it really is such a game changer because, you know, I feel like for a lot of people, you know, it's a lot of what we do, but like, you know, kind of a classic example here of like, you know, just how we can make things a little bit better and how we can be flexible. You know, I think it's people kind of get pretty extreme with it where it's like if they go out, they feel like they just need to get, you know, like chicken, broccoli, rice, or whatever it may be, right? And then, but it's like we can be flexible with it. And the classic example here is I was looking through a client's food log recently, and she had gone out and got burger and fries, and you know, she logged it. So, you know, I'm very appreciative of her doing that. She logged everything she had, but it was like, you know, there was fries and then there was a burger, but then there was like a ton of cheese on it. It was also with mayo, it was with bacon. And I'm like, look, like, first of all, I appreciate you doing this, you know, and logging this because a lot of people just like don't do that. But, you know, again, hey, here's how we can make this meal a little bit better, right? It's like, you know, can you maybe not have the bacon and the mayo with it, and like you still have, you know, burger, but then you know, add more like kind of garnishes like the lettuce and tomato with it, right? And then maybe instead of fries you do something a little bit more nutrient dense on the side, right? And you know, just kind of
I
small
love that.
examples
No,
like that, you know, where it's like you still enjoy the burger, but we're just kind of taking out some of that kind of extra kind of fluff, you know, with it.
yeah, 100%. No, I love that so much. And I think it all also comes back to that conversation of like, we're trying to be in a cut right now. You're trying to lose weight. So maybe you can skip the one half of the bun next time. Like you said, you know, so that you're not starving for the rest of the day or the rest of the week just because you have that one meal. And then again, you have a negative experience with it. But instead, oh, you're okay. You are a larger male. You do have a bunch of calories to spare. It's no problem if we have a meal that's 1,000 calories, but if you're petite and your calorie allowance is 1,300, well, maybe not the best idea.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Unfortunately, people that are petite and smaller are definitely at a disadvantage in today's modern society, right? When it comes to food, you know, it's just kind of a conversation I have with a lot of my female clients regularly. It's just like, yeah, I mean, you're just kind of, you know, and a lot of portion sizes are also geared towards, I feel like, men that are, you know, their calorie allowance is 2,500, 3,000. So it's just kind of the unfortunate truth there.
oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's it's sad. It's a sad realization, but the sooner we accept reality, the sooner we can move on and just deal with it. And I mean, that's certain things. You and I actually connected over Body by Science, Bill Campbell's research review, and I love digging into like some of the newer research that's coming out. And I think his review is so great because he does such a fantastic job of summarizing very complex topics. And what excites me a lot at the moment is just more and more research coming out about the mindset that we have towards things, right? And or even placebo things, but they're obviously connected. So if we're thinking of something being positive for us or being easy or being good long term, it's not that we can trick our physiology, but if you tell yourself, hey, this weight loss phase is easy, it's for a certain amount of time, I can do this, I have a goal, I have a why, it's going to be so much easier than if you just look at it from, oh, I can't have that, oh, this sucks, I just want to eat what everyone else is eating. And oh, actually, like, I don't like eating vegetables. It's so different. So we can actually trick ourselves quite a lot in the way that we talk to ourselves. And some brilliant studies. I think there was one where they gave participants a milkshake or like a shake, and one half of the participants, they told that this was like really low calorie and really good for you, and and the second half they told, this is a shake, has sugar in it, it's 500 calories, you both have to drink it. And they monitored mostly their insulin response, but also some hunger signals and so on afterwards. And their physiological response, even though it was the exact same shake, their physiological response in terms of hormones, in terms of insulin and satiety hormones, was different. And I think that is so crazy. So if you but like we can use that to our advantage and disadvantage. If you tell yourself any slice of bread is going to make me fat, I blow up when I eat carbs, the way that you tell yourself that has an effect, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm having that once a week because it's my favorite bread, I like it, I'm gonna enjoy it, and then move on. I find it fast. I don't know if that's something that fascinates you also.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I wonder if it has anything to do with just maybe the stress response to it potentially, of like, it's like, and this is a whole topic in of itself of, how we label foods good or bad, right? It's like, people that are maybe in that position, they don't really have that education around nutrition, and they're in that kind of black or white thinking, that kind of thought of like, oh, this is bad for me, could maybe trigger that kind of stress response. And I'm sure that was something you noticed with the glucose, right? Was that, again, stress can also be a thing that kind of impacts that as well. So I'm curious. I mean, to throw that back at you, I would imagine that could be part of what's going on there
Oh,
as well too.
absolutely. Like if we eat the same food in a stressed state or in a more relaxed state, I mean, not for no reason do they call it the rest and digest state versus fight or flight. But yeah, that would totally play into that as well. And again, like there's other studies that show, like if you tell someone their physical activity is at work is good for them. Like I think there was a study done with like hotel workers. If you tell them their physical activity is good for them and it's helping them strengthen their muscles and good for longevity, very different outcomes after a few weeks, even just by telling them that, then if you tell them, well, any kind of stress, terrible for you, you better rest up when you get home, and yes, stress has really negative impact on the body. So how we perceive things and just go through our daily lives as well. And like I think we can actually apply that quite well, or take something away from that quite well when we're sitting in traffic. That person that's cutting you off, they don't have to ruin the next hour for you. You don't need to get upset about that. And just learning to let go of certain things, or reframing your stress as something positive, a privilege that you get to run after your kids and clean up the house and so on. Like it's a privilege that you have that house to take care of, and that you have the kids to drop off here and there, and that you then get to work out, as opposed to, oh, I need to squeeze all of that in my day.
And you can listen to either one of our podcasts, while you're in traffic as well too. You get to listen to our podcast as well,
There
right?
you go.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% on that. So yeah, that is super interesting. Again, you're kind of again, for me, that just kind of doubles down on like really kind of, making sure we get away from that kind of good versus bad food, and how, how that can impact things, as well too, from that thought process. A study that we both kind of reviewed in Body by Science was the I believe it was a split kind of training program versus like a full body, and they did find that the full body had a little bit more fat loss compared to the split training group. I found that super interesting. Just kind of would be curious to hear your thoughts on it, kind of what you took away from it. But I don't know if you had this yet, but I already had somebody kind of reach out and they mentioned that they saw that and they thought that maybe that was the reason they were plateaued. And I kind of was like saying like, it's probably not the reason you're plateaued. I mean, obviously when we're in a fat loss phase like that, I think any little thing that you can put in your favor, you want to try to do. But, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be like, if you're doing like more of a split versus full body, definitely, maybe try that full body, but I don't think that's probably not going to be the big thing that's going to like, be the reason you're like super plateaued or anything like that. It's probably the adherence that we talked about. But again, I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on it and if you had any kind of big takeaways from that
Yeah, I
study.
will say that I was quite surprised about that too, because I personally think that most people, if they train 4 or 5 times per week or more, if they do a full body split, they have a hard time recovering. And so that is coming from my personal experience in terms of doing CrossFit several times per week. And obviously that's always full body. I have never done a bodybuilding full body splits 5, 6 times per week, but I love giving certain muscle groups at least 48 hours but before I hit them again. So I can't, and I feel like currently I need that. So I would probably have to be very, very strategic about the separation. The other thing for me too that came up with, I personally, and I know many people too that feel like that, if they have a full body split, they don't connect as well with their muscles. So since I just learned how to do that, I don't think that if I just had one exercise for a muscle group in a day, I would fully be able to get that connection going. So those are my thoughts against the full body split. Now, of course, if someone just quote unquote trains 3 times per week or even 4 times per week, I think it can work very well. I do think the point that was not hit or might not be as apparent when having read that study or having read that review for many people might be that they were postulating perhaps with the full body split that if you're not that sore or not as sore as with the other one, you are maintaining more of daily activity, more of your NEAT, and that is what might have led to more fat loss. But I think you probably more or less monitor steps with your clients as well. So I think if we do that in a dieting phase, we can actually offset quite a lot of that loss of movement that we might get from just having lower energy in a dieting phase or being a little bit more sore because you're like, oh, I still need to get my steps even though I just had a really hard leg day. So it's not, for me personally, it's not going to change the way that I train or even the way that I program with my clients. So if someone only trains 3 or 4 times per week, I will give them a full body split. If someone wants to train 5 or 6 times, I will probably recommend a body part split or a push-pull split instead. But yeah, those were kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I also think we need to be careful with like the terminology around full body because I think when people hear full body, they do automatically, and maybe that's what they meant in the research was, hey, they're training every single muscle group. And I can't remember how many times per week the full body trained. Do you remember how many times per week the full
I
body
do think it
trained?
was 5 for
5.
both groups, yes, but yeah, very very little. It would be like 2 sets for your chest or whatever, like or 1 set per day or something like that. But
Yeah.
again, like I personally, especially if you build up to a certain weight, for me it's a bit of a mystery of like how do you how do you even do that if you want to build up to a certain weight?
Yeah, I mean, if you're more advanced, you'd really, I think it would be super hard to do that. And then you would have to be smart about your exercise selection. You'd have to change your intensity, like how close you get to failure. You probably wouldn't be able to get super close to failure on
Exactly.
as much. You wouldn't be able to always do like Romanian deadlifts every time you go in, right? Things like that. But I'm also wondering too, though, like I think with the terminology around full body training, I think sometimes again in a study you have to do it a certain way and how they did it, that's how they did it. But I think in general, you could do full body, but I don't think it always necessarily has to be you're working every single muscle group either, right?
No,
I
I
think it can be
totally agree.
yeah, I think it could be multiple muscle groups. Again, maybe it's not every single one every single time, but
No, that is such a good point. So you could do like squats and bench one day, and then another day deadlifts and or hip thrust or whatever, and shoulder press or so. Like, yeah, I get that point. So I mean that would make more sense.
And it's still like technically full body, but it's not hitting every single muscle group
Yeah.
either, right? So
Yeah.
super interesting. Cool. Well, I know also, I think I saw on like social media, do you do like a like kind of research review, or like you kind of go over research? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so I guess I think it's been a year and a half that I every week I meet up with some other coaches like yourselves, and we just discuss either an article in a research review like Body by Science, or just the article itself, because I've mostly started it because I wanted to again have accountability, that I continue reading research. And that was after my master's. I was like, I like keeping up with the research, but I read like maybe one paper per month. And then, as you know too, if you don't apply or teach it or so, it just gets kind of lost. And so I started that, and it's been really fun. Sometimes it's a bit of um a touchy discussion, because of course not everyone has the same view on everything, but I love that. I think it's so
Yeah.
great when we can just exchange different perspectives and respect each other's opinions as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could definitely see how that's helpful, right? Because you kind of get not you specifically, but in general, we get kind of stuck in our own ways where it's like we see things a certain way, and you don't really think about it from others' point of view, and it can be super helpful to kind of get somebody that maybe has slightly opposing views from you. And again, I think that's where I'm sure you feel the same way, having the podcast
Hmm.
can be super helpful. But also, I think on that, I totally understand that. I love like staying up to date on it, but like you said, sometimes it can be daunting, and I think this is where like the research reviews are so helpful, because it really kind of breaks it down, like the stuff that we need to know, where, because like, I mean, regular looking at regular research papers, oh man, sometimes that's just like freaking brutal. I don't have the mental capacity after working with clients all day to even, look at stuff like that. So like the research reviews can be super helpful to kind of break that down. So Body by Science, Reps, Mass, all those I think are fantastic. So
Absolutely agree.
cool, Lisa. Well, a ton of great information here. Really appreciate your time. It was fun being on your podcast. It was fun having you on here. Learned a lot chatting with you. So before I let you go, though, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or anything coming out on your end that you want to let the audience know about?
Yeah, I'm really most active on Instagram. So at Nutrition Coaching and Life is my handle. Of course, you can also contact us through the website, nutritioncoachingandlife.com. But yeah, tuning into our podcast from time to time, I would appreciate that too. So Nutrition and Life is the podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a true pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for coming on, Lisa, and we'll talk to you again soon.